Octogesima Adveniens Apostolic Letter of Pope Paul VI to Cardinal Maurice Roy, President of the Council of the Laity and of the Pontifical Commission Justice and Peace on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the encyclical Rerum Novarum. Venerable Brother, the 80th anniversary of the publication of the encyclical Rerum Novarum, the message of which continues to inspire action for social justice, prompts us to take up again and extend the teaching of our predecessors. In response to the new needs of a changing world, the Church, in fact, travels forward with humanity and shares its lot in the settings of history. At the same time that she announces to men the good news of God's love and of salvation in Christ, she clarifies their activity in the light of the gospel, and in this way helps them to correspond to God's plan of love and to realize the fullness of their aspiration. Universal Appeal. It is with confidence that we see the Spirit of the Lord pursuing His work in the hearts of men and in every place, gathering together Christian communities, conscious of their responsibilities in society. On all continents, among all races, nations, and cultures, and under all conditions, the Lord continues to rise up authentic apostles of the gospel. We have had the opportunity to meet these people, to admire them, and to give them our encouragement in the course of our recent journeys. We have gone into the crowds and have their appeals, cries of distress, and at the same time cries of hope. Under these circumstances, we have seen in a new perspective the grave problems of our time. These problems, of course, are particular to each part of the world, but at the same time they are all common to mankind, which is questioning itself about its future and about the tendency and the meaning of changes taking place. Flagrant inequalities exist in the economy, cultural and political development of the nation. While some regions are heavily industrialized, others are still at the agricultural stage. While some countries enjoy prosperity, others are struggling against starvation. While some peoples have a high standard of culture, others are still engaging in eliminating illiteracy. From all sides, there rises a yearning for more justice and desire for a better guaranteed peace in mutual respect among individuals and people. Diversity of situations. There is, of course, a wide diversity among the situations in which Christians, willingly or unwillingly, find themselves according to regions, social-political system, and cultures. In some places, they are reduced to silence, regarded with suspicion, and, as it were, kept on the fringe of society, enclosed without freedom in a totalitarian system. In other places, there are a weak minority whose voice makes itself heard with difficulty. In some other nation, where the Church sees her place recognized, sometimes officially so, she too finds herself subjected to the repercussions of the crisis which is unsettling society. Some of her members are tempted by radical and violent solutions from which they believe that they can expect a happier outcome, while some people, unaware of present injustices, strive to prolong the existing situations. Others allow themselves to be beguiled by revolutionary ideologies which promise them, not without delusion, a definitely better world. In the face of such widely varying situation, it is difficult for us to utter a unified message and to put forward a solution which has universal validity. Such is not our ambition, nor is it our mission. It is up to the Christian communities to analyze with objectivity the situation which is proper to their own country, to shed on it the light of the gospel unalterable words, and to draw principles of their reflection, norms of judgment, and directives for action from the social teachings of the Church. This social teaching has been worked out in the course of history and notably in this industrial era. Since the historic date of the message of Pope Leo XIII on the condition of workers, and it is an honor and joy for us to celebrate today the anniversary of the message. It is up to these Christian communities, with the help of the Holy Spirit, in communion with the bishops who hold responsibility and dialogue with other Christian brethren, and all men of goodwill, to discern the options and commitments which are called for in order to bring about the social, political, and economic changes seen in many cases to the urgently needed. In this search for the changes which should be promoted, Christians must first of all renew their confidence in the forcefulness and special character of the demands made by the gospel. The gospel is not out of date because it was proclaimed, written, and lived in different social-cultural contexts. Its inspiration, enriched by the living experience of Christian traditions over the centuries, remains every new for converting men. And for advancing the life of society, it is not, however, to be utilized for the profit of particular temporal options to the neglect of its universal and eternal message.
Specific message of the Church. Amid the disturbances and uncertainties of the present hour, the Church has a specific message to proclaim and a support to give to men in their efforts to take in hand and give direction to their future. Since the period in which the encyclical Rerum Novarum denounced in a forceful and imperative manner the scandal of the condition of the workers in the nascent industrial society, historical evolution has led to an awareness of other dimensions and other applications of social justice. The encyclicals Quadragesimo Anno and Mater et Magistra already noted this fact. The recent council, for its part, took care to point them out, in particular in the Pastoral Constitution Gaudium et Spes. We ourselves have already continued these lines of thought in our encyclical Populorum Progressio. Today, we said, the principal fact that we must all recognize is that the social question has become worldwide. A renewed consciousness of the demands of the gospel makes it the Church's duty to put herself at the service of all, to help them grasp their serious problem in all its dimensions, and to convince them that solidarity in action at this turning point in human history is a matter of urgency. It will moreover be for the forthcoming Synod of Bishops itself to study more closely and to examine in greater detail the Church's mission in the face of grave issues raised today by the question of justice in the world. But the anniversary of Rerum Novarum, Venerable Brother, gives us the opportunity today to confide our preoccupations and thoughts in the face of this problem to you as President of the Pontifical Commission Justice and Peace and of the Council of Laity. In this way, it is also our wish to offer these bodies of the Holy See our encouragement in their ecclesial activity in the service of men. Extent of present-day changes. In so doing, our purpose, without however forgetting the permanent problems already dealt with by our predecessors, is to draw attention to a number of questions. These are questions which, because of their urgency, extent, and complexity, must in the years to come take first place among the preoccupations of Christians, so that with other men the latter may dedicate themselves to solving the new difficulties which put the very future of man in jeopardy. It is necessary to situate the problems created by the modern economy in the wider context of a new civilization. These problems include human conditions of production, fairness in the exchange of goods and in the division of wealth, the significance of the increased needs of consumption, and the sharing of responsibility. In the present changes, which are so profound and so rapid, each day man discovers himself anew, and he questions himself about the meaning of his own being and of his collective survival. Reluctant to gather the lessons of a past that he considers over and done with and too different from the present, man nevertheless needs to have light shed upon his future, a future which he perceives to be as uncertain as it is changing, by permanent eternal truths. These are truths which are certainly greater than man, but, if he so wills, he can himself find their traces. New social problems. Urbanizations. A major phenomenon draws our attention, as much in the industrialized countries as in those which are developing. urbanization. After long centuries, agrarian civilization is weakening. Is sufficient attention being devoted to the arrangement and improvement of the life of the country people, whose inferior and at times miserable economic situation provokes the flight to the unhappy crowded conditions of the city outskirts where neither employment nor housing awaits them? This unceasing flight from the land, industrial growth, continual demographic expansion, and the attraction of urban centers bring about concentrations of population, the extent of which is difficult to imagine, for people are already speaking in terms of a megalopolis, grouping together tens of millions of persons. Of course, there exist medium-sized towns, the dimensions of which ensures a better balance in the population, while being able to offer employment to those that progress in agriculture makes available. They permit an adjustment of the human environment which better avoids the proletarianism and crowding of the great built-up areas.
The inordinate growth of these centers accompanies industrial expansion without being identified with it. Based on technological research and the transformation of nature, industrialization constantly goes forward, giving proof of its incessant creativity. While certain enterprises develop and are concentrated, others die or change their location. Thus, new social problems are created: professional or regional unemployment, redeployment and mobility of persons, permanent adaptation of workers, and disparity of conditions in the different branches of industry. Unlimited competition utilizing the modern means of publicity incessantly launches new products and tries to attract the consumer, while earlier industrial installations, which are still capable of functioning, become useless. While very large areas of the population are unable to satisfy their primary needs, superfluous needs are indigenously created. It can thus rightly be asked if, in spite all of his conquests, man is not turning back against himself the results of his activity. Having rationally endeavored to control nature, is he not now becoming the slave of the objects which he makes? Christians in the city. Is not the rise of an urban civilization which accompanies the advance of industrial civilization a true challenge to the wisdom of man, to his capacity for organization, and to his foreseeing imagination? Within industrial society, urbanization upsets both the ways of life and the habitual structures of existence, the family, the neighborhood, and the very framework of the Christian community. Man is experiencing a new loneliness. It is not in the face of a hostile nature which it has taken him centuries to subdue, but in an anonymous crowd which surrounds him and in which he feels himself a stranger. Urbanization, undoubtedly an irreversible stage in the development of human societies, confronts man with difficult problems. How is he to master its growth, regulate its organization, and successfully accomplish its animation for the good of all? In this disordered growth, new proletariats are born. They install themselves in the hearts of the cities, sometimes abandoned by the rich. They dwell on the outskirts, which become a belt of misery, besieging in a still silent protest the luxury which blatantly cries out from centers of consumption and waste. Instead of favoring fraternal encounter and mutual aid, the city fosters discrimination and also indifference. It lends itself to new forms of exploitation and of domination, whereby some people, in speculating on the needs of others, derive inadmissible profits. Behind the facades, much misery is hidden, unsuspected even by the closest neighbors. Other forms of misery spread where human dignity founders: delinquency, criminality, abuse of drugs, and eroticism. It is in fact the weakest who are the victims of dehumanizing living conditions, degrading for conscience and harmful for the family institution. The promiscuity of working people's housing makes a minimum of intimacy impossible. Young couples waiting in vain for a decent dwelling at a price they can afford are demoralized, and their union can thereby even be endangered. Youth escape from a home which is too confined and seek in the streets compensations and companionships which cannot be supervised. It is the grave duty of those responsible to strive to control this process and to give it direction. There is an urgent need to remake at the level of the street, of the neighborhood, or of the great agglomerative dwellings, the social fabric whereby man may be able to develop the needs of his personality. Centers of special interest and of culture must be created or developed at the community and parish levels with different forms of associations, recreational centers, and spiritual and community gatherings, where the individual can escape from isolation and form a new fraternal relationships. To build up the city, the place where men and their expanded communities exist, to create new modes of neighborliness and relationships, to perceive an original application of social justice, and to undertake responsibility for this collective future, which is foreseen as difficult, is a task in which Christians must share. To those who are heaped up in an urban promiscuity which becomes intolerable, it is necessary to bring a message of hope. This can be done by brotherhood, which is lived, and by concrete justice. Let Christians, conscious of this new responsibility, not lose heart in the view of the vast and faithless society. Let them recall Jonah, who traversed Nineveh, the great city, to proclaim therein the good news of God's mercy, and was upheld in this weakness by the sole strength of the word of Almighty God. In the Bible, the city is in fact often the place of sin and pride, the pride of man who feels secure enough to be able to build his life without God, and even to affirm that he is powerful against God. But there is also the example of Jerusalem, the holy city, the place where God is encountered, the promise of the city which comes from on high.
Youth. Urban life and industrial change bring strongly to light questions which until now were poorly grasped. What place, for example, in this world being brought to birth should be given to youth? Everywhere dialogue is proving to be difficult between youth, with its aspirations, renewal, and also insecurity for the future, and the adult generations. It is obvious to all that here we have a source of serious conflicts, division and opting out, even within the family, and the questioning of modes of authority, education for freedom, and the handling on of values and beliefs, which strikes at the deep roots of society. The role of women. Similarly, in many countries, a charter for women which would put an end to an actual discrimination and would establish relationships of equality in rights and of respect for their dignity is the object of study and at times of lively demands. We do not have in mind that false equality which would deny the distinction with woman's proper role, which is of such capital importance at the heart of the family as well as within society. Development and legalization should on the contrary be directed to protecting her proper vocation and at the same time recognizing her independence as a person and her equal rights to participate in cultural, economic, social, and political life. Workers. As the Church solemnly reaffirmed in the recent Council, the beginning, the subject, and the goal of all social institution is and must be a human person. Every man has the right to work, to a chance to develop his qualities and his personality in the exercise of his profession, to equitable remuneration, which will enable him and his family to lead a worthy life on the material, social, cultural, and spiritual level, and to assistance in case of need arising from sickness or age. Although for the defense of these rights, democratic societies accept today the principle of labor union rights. They are not always open to their exercise. The important role of union organizations must be admitted. Their object is the representation of the various categories of workers, their lawful collaboration in the economic advance of society, and the development of the sense of their responsibility for the realization of common good. Their activity, however, is not without its difficulties. Here and there, the temptation can arise of profiting from a position of force to impose, particularly by strikes, the right to which as final means of defense remains certainly recognized. Conditions which are too burdensome for the overall economy and for the social body or to desire to obtain in this way demands of a directly political nature. When it is a question of public service required for the life of an entire nation, it is necessary to be able to assess the limit beyond which the harm caused to society become inadmissible. Victims of changes, in short, progress has already been in introducing in the area of human relationships greater justice and greater sharing of responsibilities. But in this immense field, much remains to be done. Further reflection, research, and experimentation must be actively pursued. Unless one is to be late in meeting the legitimate aspirations of the workers' aspirations, which are being increasingly asserted according as their education, their consciousness of their dignity, and the strength of their organizations increase. Egoism and domination are permanent temptations for men. Likewise, an ever finer discernment is needed in order to strike all the roots of newly arising situations of injustice and to establish progressively a justice which will be less and less imperfect. In industrial change, which demands speedy and constant adoption, those who will find themselves injured will be more numerous and at a greater disadvantage from the point of view of making their voices heard. The Church directs her attention to those new, poor, the handicapped, and the maladjusted, the old, different groups of those on the fringe of society, and so on, in order to recognize them, help them, defend their place and dignity in a society hardened by competition and the attraction of success. Discrimination. Among the victims of situations of injustice, unfortunately, no phenomenon must be played those who are discriminated against in law or in fact on account of their race, origin, color, culture, sex, or religion. Racial discrimination possesses at the moment a character of very great relevance by reason of the tension which it stirs up both within countries and at the international level. Men rightly consider unjustifiable and reject as inadmissible the tendency to maintain or introduce legalization or behavior systematically inspired by racialist prejudice. The members of mankind share the same basic rights and duties as well as the same supernatural destiny within a country which belongs to each one. All should be equal before the law. Find equal admittance to economic, cultural, civic, and social life and benefit from a fair sharing of the nation's riches. Right to emigrate. We are thinking of its precarious situation of a great number of emigrant workers whose condition as foreigners makes it all the more difficult for them to make any sort of social vindication. In spite of their real participation in the economic effort of the country that receives them, it is urgently necessary for people to go beyond a narrowly nationalist attitude in their regard and to give them a charter which will assure them a right to emigrate, favor their integration, facilitate their professional advancement, and give them access to decent housing where, if such is the case, their families can join them. Linked to this category are the people who, to find work or to escape a disaster or a hostile climate, leave their regions and find themselves without roots among people. It is everyone's duty, but especially that of Christians, to work with energy for the establishment of universal brotherhood, the indispensable basis for authentic justice and the condition for enduring peace. We cannot in truthfulness call upon that God, who is the Father of all, if we refuse to act in a brotherly way towards certain men created to God's image. A man's relationship with the God Father and his relationship with his brother men are so linked together that Scripture says, "He who does not love does not know God."
right to immigrate. We are thinking of the precarious situation of a great number of immigrant workers whose condition as foreigners makes it all the more difficult for them to make any sort of social vindication, in spite of their real participation in the economic effort of the country that receives them. It is urgently necessary for people to go beyond a narrowly nationalist attitude in their regard and to give them a charter which will assure them a right to immigrate, favor their integration, facilitate their personal advancement, and give them access to decent housing where, if such is the case, their families can join them. Linked to this category are the people who, to find work, or to escape a disaster or a hostile climate, leave their regions and find themselves without roots among other people. It is everyone's duty, but especially that of Christians, to work with energy for the establishment of universal brotherhood, the indispensable basis for authentic justice and the condition for enduring peace. We cannot in truthfulness call upon that God who is the Father of all if we refuse to act in a brotherly way towards certain men, created to God's image. A man's relationship with God, the Father, and his relationship with his brother men are so linked together that Scripture says, "He who does not love does not know God." Creating employment. With demographic growth, which is particularly pronounced in the young nations, the number of those failing to find work and driven to misery or parasitism will grow in the coming years unless the conscience of men rouses itself and gives rise to a general movement of solidarity through an effective policy of investment and of organization of production and trade, as well as of education. We know the attention given to these problems within international organizations, and it is our lively wish that their members will not delay bringing their actions into line with their declarations. It is disquieting in this regard to note a kind of fatalism which is gaining a hold even on people in positions of responsibility. This feeling sometimes leads to Malthusian solutions inculcated by active propaganda for contraception and abortion. In this critical situation, it must, on the contrary, be affirmed that the family without which no society can stand has a right to the assistance which will assure it of the conditions for healthy development. It is certain, we said in our encyclical Popularium Progressio, that public authorities can intervene within the limit of their competence by favoring the availability of the appropriate information and by adopting suitable measures, provided that this be in conformity with the moral law and that they respect the rightful freedom of married couples. Where the inalienable right to marriage and procreation is lacking, human dignity has ceased to exist. In no other age has the appeal to the imaginations of society been so explicit. To this should be devoted enterprises of invention and capital as important as those invested for armaments or technological achievements. If man lets himself rush ahead without foreseeing in good time the emergence of new social problems, they will become too grave for a peaceful solution to be hoped for. Media of social communication. Among the major changes of our times, we don't wish to forget to emphasize the growing role being assumed by the media of social communication and their influence on the transformation of mentalities of knowledge, of organizations, and of society itself. Certainly, they have many positive aspects. Thanks to them, news from the entire world reaches us practically in an instant, establishing contacts which supersede distances and creating elements of unity among all men. A greater spread of education and culture is becoming possible. Nevertheless, by their very action, the media of social communication are reaching the point of representing as it were a new power. One cannot but ask about those who really hold this power, the aims that they pursue, and the means they use, and finally about the effect of their activity on the exercise of individual liberty, both in the political and ideological spheres and in social, economic, and cultural life. The men who hold this power have a grave moral responsibility with respect to the truth of the information that they spread, the needs and the reactions that they generate, and the values which they put forward. In the case of television, moreover, what is coming into being is an original mode of knowledge and a new civilization, that of the image. Naturally, the public authorities cannot ignore the growing power and influence of the media of social communication and the advantages and risks which they use involves for the civic community and for its development and real perfecting. Consequently, they are called upon to perform their own positive function for the common good by encouraging every constructive expression, by supporting individual citizens and groups in defending the fundamental values of the person and of human society, and also by taking suitable steps to prevent the spread of what would harm the common heritage of values on which orderly civil progress is based.
The environment. While the horizon of man is thus being modified according to the images that are chosen for him, another transformation is making itself felt, one which is the dramatic and unexpected consequence of human activity. Man is suddenly becoming aware that by an ill-considered exploitation of nature he risks destroying it and becoming in his turn the victim of this degradation. Not only is the material environment becoming a permanent menace, pollution and refuse, new illness, and absolute destructive capacity, but the human framework is no longer under man's control, thus creating an environment for tomorrow which may well be intolerable. This is a wide-ranging social problem which concerns the entire human family. The Christian must turn to these new perceptions in order to take on responsibility, together with the rest of men, for a destiny which from now on is shared by all. Fundamental aspirations and currents of ideas. While scientific and technological progress continues to overturn man's surroundings, his patterns of knowledge, work, consumption, and relationships, two aspirations persistently make themselves felt in these new contexts, and they grow stronger to the extent that he becomes better informed and better educated. The aspiration to equality and the aspiration to participation, two forms of man's dignity and freedom. Advantages and limitations of juridical recognition. Through the statement of the rights of man and the seeking for international agreements for the application of these rights, progress has been made towards inscribing these two aspirations in deeds and structures. Nevertheless, various forms of discrimination continually reappear: ethnic, cultural, religious, political, and so on. In fact, human rights are still too often disregarded, if not scoffed at, or else they receive only formal recognition. In many cases, legislation does not keep up with real situations. Legislation is necessary, but it is not sufficient for setting up true relationships of justice and equity. In teaching us charity, the Gospel instructs us in the preferential respect due to the poor and the special situation they have in society. The more fortunate should renounce some of their rights so as to place their goods more generously at the service of others. If, beyond legal rules, there is really no deeper feeling of respect for and service to others than even equality before the law can serve as an alibi for flagrant discrimination, continued exploitation, and actual contempt. Without a renewed education in solidarity, an overemphasis of equality can give rise to an individualism in which each one claims his own rights without wishing to be answerable for the common good. In this field, everyone sees the highly important contribution of the Christian spirit, which moreover answers man's yearning to be loved. Love for man, the prime value of the earthly order, ensures the conditions for peace, both social peace and international peace, by affirming our universal brotherhood. The political society. The two aspirations to equality and to participation seek to promote a democratic type of society. Various models are proposed, some are tried out, none of them gives complete satisfaction, and the search goes on between ideological and pragmatic tendencies. The Christian has the duty to take part in this search and in the organization and life of political society. As a social being, man builds his destiny within a series of particular groupings which demand, as their completion and as a necessary condition for their development, a vaster society, one of a universal character, the political society. All particular activity must be placed within the wider society, and thereby it takes on the dimension of the common good.
Political activity. Need one remark that we are dealing primarily with an activity, not an ideology? Should be the projection of a plan of society which is consistent in its concrete means and in its inspiration, and which springs from a complete conception of a man's vocation and of its differing social expressions. It is not for the state or even the political parties, which would be close unto themselves, to try to impose an ideology by means that would lead to a dictatorship over minds, the worst kind of all. It is for cultural and religious groupings, in the freedom of acceptance which they presume to develop in the social body, disinterestedly and in their own ways. Those ultimate convictions on the nature, origin, and end of the man and society. In this field, it is well to keep in mind the principle proclaimed by the Second Vatican Council. The truth cannot impose itself except by virtue of its own truth, and it makes its entrance into the mind at once quietly and with power. Ideologies and human liberty. Therefore, the Christian who wishes to live his faith in a political activity which he thinks of as service cannot, without contradicting himself, adhere to ideological systems which radically or substantially go against his faith and his concept of man. He cannot adhere to the Marxist ideology, to its atheistic materialism, to its dialectic of violence, and to the way it absorbs individual freedom in the collectivity, at the same time denying all transcendence to man and his personal collective history. Nor can be adhered to the liberal ideology, which believe it exalts individual freedom by withdrawing it from every limitation, by stimulating it through exclusive seeking of interest and power, and by considering social solidarities as more or less automatic consequences of individual initiatives, not as an aim and a major criterion of the value of the social organization. Is there a need to stress the possible ambiguity of every social ideology? Sometimes it leads political or social activity to be simply the application of an abstract, purely theoretical idea. At other times, it is thought which becomes a mere instrument at the service of activity as a simple means of a strategy. In both cases, is it not man that risks finding himself alienated? The Christian faith is above and is sometimes opposed to the ideologies, in that it recognizes God, who is transcendent and the creator, and who, through all levels of creation, calls on man as endowed with responsibility and freedom. There would also be the danger of giving adherence to an ideology which does not rest on true and organic doctrine. To take refuge in it as a final and sufficient explanation of everything, and thus to build a new idol, accepting, at times without being aware of doing so, its totalitarian and coercive character. And people imagine they find in it a justification for their activity, even violent activity, and an adequate response to a generous desire to serve. The desire remains, but it allows itself to be consumed by an ideology which, even if it suggests certain paths to a man's liberation, ends up by making him a slave.
It has been possible today to speak a free sheet of ideologies. In this respect, the present time may be favorable for an openness to the concrete transcendence of Christianity. It may also be a more accentuated, sliding towards a new positivism, universalized technology as a dominant form of activity, as the overwhelming pattern of existence, even as a language, without a question of its meaning being really asked. Historical movements. But outside of this positivism, which reduces a man to a single dimension, even if it be an important one today, and by so doing mutilates him, the Christian encounters in his activity concrete historical movements sprung from ideologies and in part distinct from them. Our venerated predecessor Pope John XXIII and Pacem in Therese already show that it is possible to make a distinction. Neither can false philosophical teachings regarding the nature, origin, and destiny of the universe and of man be identified with historical movements that have economic, social, cultural, or political ends, not even when these movements have originated from those teachings and have drawn and still draw inspiration therefrom. Because the teachings, once they are drawn up and defined, remain always the same, while the movements being concerned with historical situations and constant evolution cannot but be influenced by this latter and cannot avoid, therefore being subject to changes even of a profound nature. Besides, who can deny that those movements, in so far as they conform to the dictates of right reason and are interpreters of the lawful aspirations of the human person, contain elements that are positive and deserving of approval? Attraction of socialist currents. Some Christians are today attracted by socialist currents and their various developments. They try to recognize therein a certain number of aspirations which they carry within themselves in the name of their faith. They feel that they are part of the historical current and wish to play a part within it. Now this historical current takes on, under the same name, different forms according to different continents and cultures, even if it drew its inspiration, and still does in many cases, from ideologies incompatible with faith. Careful judgment is called for. Too often, Christians attracted by socialism tend to idealize the terms which, apart from anything else, are very general: a will for justice, solidarity, and equality. They refuse to recognize the limitations of the historical socialist movements, which remain conditioned by the ideologies from which they originated. Distinctions must be made to guide concrete choices between the various levels of expression of socialism, a generous aspiration, and a seeking for a more just society. Historical movements with a political organization and aim, and an ideology which claims to give a complete and self-sufficient picture of man. Nevertheless, these distinctions must not lead one to consider such levels as completely separate and independent. The concrete link which, according to circumstances, exists between them must be clearly marked out. This insight will enable Christians to see the degree of commitment possible along these lines, while safeguarding the values, especially those of liberty, responsibility, and openness to the spiritual, which guarantee the integral development. Historical evolution of Marxism. Other Christians even ask whether an historical development of Marxism may not authorize certain concrete rapprochements. They note in fact a certain splintering of Marxism which until now showed itself to be a unitary ideology which explained in atheistic terms the whole of man and the world, since it did not go outside the development process. Apart from the ideological confrontation, officially separating the various champions of Marxism, Leninism, and their individual interpretations of the thought of its founders, and apart from the open opposition between the political systems which make use of its name today. Some people laid on distinctions between Marxism's various levels of expression.
For some, Marxism remains essentially the active practice of class struggle, experiencing the ever-present and continually renewed force of the relationships of domination and exploitation among men. They reduce Marxism to no more than a struggle, at times with no other purpose, to be pursued and even stirred up in permanent fashion. For others, it is first and foremost the collective exercise of political and economic power under the direction of a single party, which would be the sole expression and guarantee of the welfare of all, and would deprive individuals and other groups of any possibility of initiative and choice. At a third level, Marxism, whether in power or not, is viewed as a socialist ideology based on historical materialism and the denial of everything transcendent. At other times, finally, it presents itself in a more attenuated form, one also more attractive to the modern mind, as a scientific activity, as rigorous method of examining social and political reality, and as the rational link tested by history between theoretical knowledge and the practice of revolutionary transformation. Although this type of analysis gives a privileged position to certain aspects of reality to the detriment of the rest, and interprets them in the light of its ideology, it nevertheless furnishes some people not only with a working tool, but also to a certitude preliminary to action. The claim to decipher in a scientific manner the mainsprings of the evolution of society. While through the concrete existing form of Marxism, one can distinguish these various aspects and the questions they pose for the reflection and activity of Christians, it would be illusory and dangerous to reach a point of forgetting the intimate link which radically binds them together. To accept the elements of Marxist analysis without recognizing their relationships with ideology, and to enter the practice of class struggle and its Marxist interpretations, while failing to note the kind of totalitarian and violent society to which this process leads. The liberal ideology. On the other side, we are witnessing a renewal of the liberal ideology. This current asserts itself both in the name of economic efficiency and for the defense of the individual against the increasingly overwhelming hold of organizations, and as a reaction against the totalitarian tendencies of political powers. Certainly, personal initiative must be maintained and developed, but do not Christians who take this path tend to idealize liberalism in their turn, making it a proclamation in favor of freedom? They would like a new model, more adapted to present-day conditions, while easily forgetting that at the very root of philosophical liberalism is an erroneous affirmation to the autonomy of the individual in his activity, his motivation, and the exercise of his liberty. Hence, the liberal ideology likewise calls for careful discernment on their part. Christian discernment. In this renewed encounter of the various ideologies, the Christian will draw from the sources of his faith and the Church's teaching the necessary principles and suitable criteria to avoid permitting himself to be first attracted by and then imprisoned within a system whose limitations and totalitarianism may well become evident to him too late, if he does nor perceive them in their roots going beyond every system without, however, failing to commit himself concretely to serving his brothers. He will assert in the very midst of his options the specific character of the Christian contribution for a positive transformation of society.
Rebirth of Utopias. Today, moreover, the weaknesses of the ideologies are better perceived through the concrete systems in which they are trying to affirm themselves. Bureaucratic socialism, technocratic capitalism, and authoritarian democracy are showing how difficult it is to solve the great human problem of living together in justice and equality. How, in fact, could they escape the materialism, egoism, or constraint which inevitably go with them? This is the source of a protest which is springing up more or less everywhere, as a sign of a deep-seated sickness, while at the same time, we are witnessing the rebirth of what it is agreed to call utopias. These claim to resolve the political problem of modern societies better than the ideologies. It would be dangerous to disregard this. The appeal to a utopia is often a convenient excuse for those who wish to escape from concrete tasks in order to take refuge in an imaginary world. To live in a hypothetical future is a facile alibi for rejecting immediate responsibilities. But it must be clearly be recognized that this kind of criticism of existing society often provokes the forward-looking imagination both to perceive in the present the disregarded possibility hidden within it, and to direct itself towards a fresh future. It thus sustains social dynamicism by the confidence that it gives to the inventive powers of the human mind and heart, and it refuses no overture. It can also meet the Christian appeal, the Spirit of the Lord, who animates man renewed in Christ. Continually breaks down the horizons within which his understandings like to find security and the limits to which his activity would willingly restrict itself. Here dwells within him a power which urges him to go beyond every system and every ideology. At the heart of the world, there dwells the mystery of man discovering himself to be God's Son in the course of a historical and psychological process in which constraint and freedom, as well as the weight of sin and the breadth of the spirit alternate and struggle for the upper hand. The dynamicism of Christian faith here triumphs over the narrow calculations of egoism, animated by the power of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind, and upheld by hope. The Christian involves himself in the building up of the human city, one that is to be peaceful, just and fraternal, and acceptable as an offering to God. In fact, the expectation of a new earth must not weaken, but rather stimulate our concern for cultivating this one. For here grows the body of a new human family, a body which even now is able to give some kind of foreshadowing of the new age. The questioning of the human sciences. The questioning of the human sciences. In this world, dominated by scientific and technological change, which threatens to drag it towards a new positivism, another more fundamental doubt is raised. Having subdued nature by using his reason, man now finds that he himself is, at it were, imprisoned within his own rationality. He in turn becomes the object of science. The human sciences are today enjoying a significant flowering. On the one hand, they are subjecting to critical and radical examination in the hitherto accepted knowledge about man, on the grounds that this knowledge seems either too empirical or too theoretical. On the other hand, methodological necessity and ideological presuppositions too often lead the human sciences to isolate, in the various situations, certain aspects of man, and yet to give this an explanation which claims to be complete, or at least an interpretation which is meant to be all-embracing from a purely quantitative or phenomenological point of view. This scientific reduction betrays a dangerous presupposition. To give a privileged position in this way to such an aspect of analysis is to mutilate man and, under the pretext of a scientific procedure, to make it impossible to understand man in his totality. One must be no less attentive to the action which the human sciences can instigate, giving rise to the elaboration of models of society, to be subsequently imposed on men as scientifically tested types of behavior. Man can then become the subject of manipulations, directing his desires and needs and modifying his behavior and even his systems of values. There is no doubt that there exists here a grave danger for the societies of tomorrow, and for man himself, for even if all agree to build a new society at the service of man, it is still essential to know what sort of man is in question. Widening the horizons. Suspicion of the human sciences affects the Christian more than others, but it does not find him disarmed. For, as we ourselves wrote in Popularum Progressio, it is here that there is found the specific contribution of the Church to civilizations, sharing the noblest aspirations of men in suffering when she sees them not satisfied. She wishes to help them attain their full flowering, and that is why she offers men what she possesses as her characteristic attribute, a global vision of men and of the human race. Should be the Church in its turn contest the proceedings of the human sciences and condemn their pretensions? As in the case of the natural sciences, the Church has confidence in this research also and urges Christians to play an active part in it. Prompted by the same scientific demands and the desire to know man better, but at the same time enlightened by their faith, Christians who devote themselves to the human sciences will begin a dialogue between the Church and this new field of discovery. A dialogue which promises to be fruitful. Of course, each individual scientific discipline will be able, in its own particular sphere, to grasp only a partial yet true aspect of men. The complete picture and the full meaning will escape it. But within these limits, the human sciences give promise of a positive function that the Church willingly recognizes. They can even widen the horizons of human liberty to a greater extent than the conditioning circumstances perceived enable one to foresee. They could thus assist Christian social morality, which no doubt will see its field restricted when it comes to suggesting certain models of society, while its function of making a critical judgment and taking an overall view will be strengthened by its showing the relative character of the behavior and the values presented by such and such a society as definitive and inherent in the very nature of man. These sciences are a condition at once indispensable and inadequate for a better discovery of what is human. They are a language which becomes more and more complex, yet one that deepens rather than solves the mystery of the heart of man, nor does it provide the complete and definitive answer to the desire which springs from his innermost being.
Ambiguous nature of progress. This better knowledge of man makes it possible to pass a better critical judgment upon and to elucidate a fundamental notion that remains at the basis of modern societies as their motive, their measure, and their goal, namely, progress. Since the 19th century, Western societies and, as a result, many others have put their hopes in ceaselessly renewed and indefinite progress. They saw this program as man's effort to free himself in face of the demands of nature and of social constraints. Progress was the condition for and the yardstick of human freedom. Progress, spread by modern media of information and by the demand of wider knowledge and greater consumption, has become an omnipresent ideology. Yet, a doubt arises today regarding both its value and its result. What is the meaning of this never-ending, breathless pursuit of a progress that always eludes one just when one believes one has conquered it sufficiently, in order to enjoy it in peace. If it is not attained, it leaves one dissatisfied. Without doubt, there has been just condemnation of the limits and even the misdeeds of merely quantitative economic growth. There is a desire to attain objectives of qualitative order also. The quality and the truth of human relations, the degree of participation and of responsibility are no less significant and important for the future of society than the quantity and variety of the goods produced and consumed. Overcoming the temptation to wish to measure everything in its terms efficiently and of trade, and in terms of the interplay of forces and interests, man today wishes to replace these quantitative criteria with the intensity of communication, the spread of knowledge and culture, mutual service, and a combining efforts for a common task. It is not genuine progress to be found in the development of moral consciousness, which will lead to exercise a wider solidarity and to open himself freely to others and to God. For a Christian, progress necessarily comes up against the eschatological mystery of death. The death of Christ and his resurrection and the outpouring of spirits of the Lord help man to place his freedom in creativity and gratitude with the context of truth of all progress and the only hope which does not deceive. Christians face to face with these new problems. Dynamism of the Church's social teaching. In the face of so many new questions, the Church makes an effort to reflect in order to give an answer, in its own sphere, to men's expectations. If today the problems seem original in their breadth and their urgency, is man without the means of solving them? It is with all its dynamism that the social teaching of the Church accompanies men in their search. If it does not intervene to authenticate a given structure or to propose a ready-made model, it does not hereby limit itself to recalling general principles. It develops through reflection applied to the changing situations of this world, under the driving force of the gospel as a source of renewal when its message is accepted in its totality and with all its demands. It also develops with the sensitivity proper to the Church, which is characterized by a disinterested will to serve and by attention to the poorest. Finally, it draws upon its rich experience of many centuries, which enables it, while continuing its permanent preoccupations, to undertake the daring and creative innovations which the present state of the world requires. For greater justice. There is a need to establish a greater justice in the sharing of goods, both within national communities and on the international level. In international exchanges, there is a need to go beyond relationships based on force in order to arrive at agreements reached with the good of all in mind. Relationships based on force have never in fact established justice in a true and lasting manner, even if at certain times the alteration of positions can often make it possible to find easier conditions for dialogue. The use of force, moreover, leads to the setting in motion of opposing forces, and from it springs a climate of struggle which opens the way to situations of extreme violence and to abuses. But as we often stated, the most important duty in the realm of justice is to allow each country to promote its own development within the framework of cooperation free from any spirit of domination, whether economic or political. The complexity of the problems raised is certainly great, and the present intertwining of mutual dependencies. Thus, it is necessary to have the courage to undertake a revision of the relationships between nations, whether it is a question of the international division of production, the structure of exchanges, or the control of profits, the monetary system, without forgetting the actions of human solidarity, to question the models of growth of the rich nations and change people's outlooks so that they may realize the prior call of international duty, and to renew international organizations so that they may increase in effectiveness. Under the driving force of new systems of production, national frontiers are breaking down, and we can see new economic powers emerging. The multinational enterprise, which the concentration and flexibility of their means can conduct autonomous strategies which are largely independent of the national political powers and therefore not subject to control from the point of view of the common good. By extending their activities, these private organizations can lead to a new and abusive form of economic domination on the social, cultural, and even political level. The excessive concentration of means and powers that Pope Pius XI already condemned on the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum is taking on a new and very real image.
Today, men yearn to free themselves from need and dependence, but this liberation starts with the interior freedom that men must find again with regard to their goods and their powers. They will never reach it except through a transcendent love for men, and consequence through a genuine neediness to serve. Otherwise, as one can see only too clearly, the most revolutionary ideologies lead to only change of master. Once installed in power, in their turn, these masters surround themselves with privilege, limit freedom, and allow other forms of injustice to become established. Thus, many people are reaching the point of questioning the very model of society. The ambition of many nations in a competition that set them in a position and which carries them along is to attain technological, economic, and military power. This ambition then stands in the way of setting up structures in which the rhythm of process will be regulated with a view to greater justice, instead of accentuating inequalities and living in a climate of distrust and struggle which would increasingly compromise peace. It is not here that here appears a radical limitation to economics. Economic activity is necessary, and if it is at the service of man, it can be a source of brotherhood and a sign of providence. It is the occasion of concrete exchange between man, of rights recognized, of services rendered, and of dignity affirmed in work. Thought it is often a field of confrontation and domination. It can give rise to dialogue and foster cooperation. Yet, it runs the risk of taking up too much strength and freedom. This is why the need is felt to pass from the economics to politics. It is true that in the term politics, many confusion are possible and must be clarified. But each man feels that in the social and economic field, both national and international, the ultimate decision rests with political power. Political power, which is the natural and necessary link for ensuring the cohesion of the social body, must have as its aim the achievement of the common good, while respecting the legitimate liberties of individuals, families, and subsidiary groups. It acts in such a way as to create effectively and for the well-being of all. The condition required for attaining man's true and completing good, including his spiritual end. It acts within the limit of its competence, which can vary from people to people and from country to country. It always intervenes with care and justice and devotion to the common good, for which it holds final responsibility. It does not for all that deprived individuals and intermediary bodies of the field of activity and responsibility which are proper to them and which lead them to collaborate in the attainment of this common good. In fact, the true aim of all social activity should be to help individual member of a social body, but never to destroy or absorb them. According to the vocation proper to it, the political power must know how to stand aside from particular interests in order to view its responsibility with regard to the good of all men, even going beyond national limits, to take politics seriously at its different level: local, regional, national, and worldwide. It to affirm the duty of every man, recognize the concrete reality and the value of the freedom of choice that is offered to him, to seek to bring about both the good and the city and the nation and of mankind. Politics are demanding manners, but not the only one of living the Christian commitment to the service of others, without, of course, solving every problem. It endeavors to apply solution to the relationship men have with one another. The domain of politics is wide and comprehensive, but it is not exclusive. An attitude of encroachment which would tend to set up politics as absolute value would be in serious danger, while recognizing the economy of the reality of politics. Christians who are invited to a political activity should try to make their choices consistent with the gospel and in the framework of legitimate plurality to give both personal collective witness to the seriousness of their faith by effective and disinterested service of men in responsibility. The passing of the political dimension also expresses a demand made by the man of today, a greater sharing in responsibility and in decision making. This legitimate aspiration become more evident as the cultural level rises, as the sense of freedom develops, and as a man become more aware of how in the world facing in an uncertain future, the choices of today already condition the life of tomorrow. In Mater et Magistra, Pope John XIII stressed how much the admittance of responsibility in a basic demand of man's nature, a concrete exercise of his freedom and path to his development. And he showed how in economic show and particularly in enterprise his sharing in responsibility should be ensured. Today, the field is wider and extended to the social and political sphere, in which reasonable sharing in responsibility and in decision must be established and strengthened. Admittedly, it is true the choices proposed for a decision are more and more complex. The consideration that must be borne in mind are numerous and foreseeing of the consequences involves risk. Even if new sciences strive the enlightened freedom as at this important moment. However, although limits are sometimes called for, this abstract must not slow down the giving of wider participation in working out decision-making choices and putting them into practice. In order to counterbalance increasing technocracy, modern form of democracy must be devised, not only making it possible for each man to become informed and to express himself, but also by involving him in shared responsibility. Thus, human group will gradually begin to share and to live as communities. Thus, freedom, which too often assert itself as a claim for autonomy by opposing the freedom of others, will develop it in its deepest human reality to involve itself and to spend itself in building up active and deep solidarity, but for the Christian, and it is by losing himself in God who set him free that man find true freedom renewed in the death of resurrection of God. Need to become involved in action. In the social sphere, the Church has always wished to assume a double function. First, to enlighten mind in order to assist them to discover the truth and to find the right path to follow among the different teaching that calls for their attention. And secondly, to take part in action and to spread with a real care for service and effectiveness and the energies of the gospel. It is not in order to be faithful to this desire that the Church has sent on an apostolic mission among the workers, priests who, by sharing fully the condition of the workers, are at the level of witness to the Church's solicitude and seeking. It is to all Christians that we addresses a fresh and insistent call to action. In our encyclical of the development of people, we argued that all should set themselves to the task. Laymen should take up as their own proper task to the renewal of the temporal order. If the role of the hierarchy is to teach and to interpret authentically the norms of morality to be formed in this matter, it belongs to the laity without waiting passively for orders and directives to take the initiatives freely and to infuse a Christian spirit into the mentally costume. law, and structures of the community in which they live. Let each one examine himself to see what he has done up to now, and what he ought to do. It is not enough to recall principal states intention people to crying injustice and outer prophetic denunciation. This word will lack real weight unless they are accompanied for each individual by a livelier awareness of personal responsibility. And by effective action, it is easy to throw back on others responsibility for injustice. If at the same time one does not realize how each one shares in it personally and how personal conversion is needed first. This basic humility will lead action of all inflexibility and sectarianism. It will also avoid discouragement in the face of a task which seems limitless in size. The Christian's hope comes primarily from the fact that he knows that the Lord is working with us in the world, continuing in his body, which is the church, and through the church in the whole of mankind. The redemption which was accomplished on the cross and which burst forth in victory on the morning of resurrection. This hope springs also from the fact that the Christian knows that other men are at work to undertake action of justice and peace, working for the same ends. For beneath an outward appearance of indifference in the heart of every man, there is a will to live in brotherhood and a thirst for justice and peace, which is to be expanded.
Each one to determine. Thus, amid the diversity of situations, functions, and organizations, each one must determine in his conscience the action which he is called to share in. Surrounded by various currents into which, besides legitimate aspirations, there insinuate themselves more ambiguous tendencies, the Christian must make a wise and vigilant choice and avoid involving himself in collaboration without conditions and contrary to the principles of true humanism, even in the name of a genuinely left solidarity. If in fact he wishes to play a specific part as a Christian in accordance with his faith, a part that unbelievers themselves expect of him, he must take care in the midst of his active commitment to clarify his motives and to rise above the objectives aimed at, by taking a more all-embracing view which will avoid the danger of selfish particularism and oppressive totalitarianism. In concrete situations and taking account of solidarity in each person's life, one must recognize a legitimate variety of possible options. The same Christian faith can lead to different commitments. The Church invites all Christians to take up a double task of inspiring and of innovating in order to make structures evolve, so as to adapt them to the real needs of today. From Christians who at first sight seem to be in opposition as a result of starting from differing options, she asks an effort at a mutual understanding of the other's position and motives, a loyal examination of one's behavior and its correctness will suggest to each one an attitude of more profound charity which while recognizing the differences, believes nonetheless in the possibility of convergence and unity. The bonds which unite the faithful are mightier than anything which divides them. It is true that man, people, in the midst of modern structures and conditioning circumstances, are determined by their habits of thought and their functions, even apart from the safeguarding of material interests. Others will so deeply the solidarity of classes and the cultures that they reach the point of sharing without reserve all the judgments and options of their surroundings. Each one will take great care to examine himself and to bring about that true freedom according to Christ, which makes one receptive to the universal in the very midst of the most popular conditions. Awakening of the people of God. It is in this regard, too, that Christian organizations, under their different forms, have a responsibility for collective action. Without putting themselves in the place of the institutions of civil society, they have to express, in their own way and rising above their particular nature, the concrete demands of the Christian faith for a just and consequently necessary transformation of society. Today, more than ever, the word of God will be unable to be proclaimed and heard unless it is accompanied by the witness of the power of the Holy Spirit working within the action of Christians in the service of their brothers at the points in which their existence and their future are at stake. In expressing these reflections to you, Venerable Brother, we are of course aware that we have not dealt with all the social problems that today face the man of faith and man of goodwill. A recent declarations to which has been added your message of a short time ago on the occasion of the launching of the second development decade, particularly concerning the duties of the community of nations in the serious question of the integral and concerted development of man, are still fresh in people's minds. We address these present reflections to you with the aim of offering to the Council of the Laity and the Pontifical Commission Justice and Peace some fresh contributions, as well as an encouragement for the pursuit of their task of awakening the people of the God to a full understanding of its role at the present time, and of promoting the apostolate on the international level. It is with these sentiments, Venerable Brother, that we impart to you our apostolic blessing.